All right, everybody, let's get going. I'm not sure what the plan is here, but I'm just gonna start talking. So, yeah, I am MilkmanAl, otherwise known as Alex. I am an anesthesiologist in the Kansas City area. I've worked in private practice for about 5 years now. Obviously, did residency and med school before that. In med school, I was a basically an interviewer for med students. Probably interviewed about, I don't know, 30-ish students in that time. And I was part of the selection process as well, and we'll kind of talk about that as we go. Residency, I was around to basically wine and dine the applicants. If you're not familiar with how that works, essentially you apply to residencies, and historically they've been very good about taking you out to dinner and trying to show you that their program is awesome before they totally cornhole you and use you as cheap labor for 4 years, or 3 to 7 years, I guess. I was there, and they the staff would always ask us for our feedback regarding what our thoughts on those people were. So we had sort of a peripheral involvement with interviewing, but we were still there. We were still kind of on the front lines vetting these people. And now, I'm in a 8-person group, so I interview everybody. Any of the anesthetists, any of the docs that we're hiring, we're all sort of intimately involved with getting them onboarded. So I wouldn't say that I have a massive amount of experience as an interviewer or an interviewee, but certainly enough to give you some decent insights into how this is going to work. Let's start with the basics. I guess there's not really a nice way to say this. Make sure you're clean when you show up to the interview. Be clean, be dressed well. If they say anything short of do not wear a suit for any reason, or instruct you specifically what you should wear, and it's not a suit, you should be wearing a suit. And this advice will apply to just about any interview that you ever do. So, be clean, have your, clothes pressed and all of that sort of thing, look the part, right? This is whether you're applying to residency or med school or, something else entirely. You want to look professional. You want to look like you deserve that job and you're interested in it. So do that. That's a really easy thing to accomplish. There are always lots of people, especially on the West Coast for some reason, who think that, the casual approach is fine, and, maybe it is for some places, but why do that? How much extra effort is it to look nice? That's very important. First impressions, you don't get a second chance to make a first impression, as they say, right? So, make sure that that's all squared away. Other things are, make sure that your routine is intact. So, go to sleep at a normal hour, be well rested, eat, do whatever you normally do for the day. So, don't disrupt anything more than you absolutely have to, because you want to be, in the right mindset for what you're doing. This is a high-powered interview. Again, whether it's for med school or residency, those are both very, very powerful positions. So make sure that you are on top of that. Eat a good breakfast, sleep well, and that sort of necessarily means travel a day before if you have to travel. So make sure you get in to wherever you're going in plenty of time to arrive at your destination. And most of the time I would show up the day earlier and make a dry run from my hotel to the hospital, and just kind of figure out how to get there and where I was going to be going, just to minimize the chance that you get lost and you don't have to figure that shit out at the last minute, because that's a bad thing to have to do when you're nervous and under pressure. You want to know where you're going as much as possible. And that also eliminates the possibility of, flights being delayed or getting in bad traffic if you're driving. It eliminates wildcards and variables. So do that. And, also consequently, it eliminates stress. And the big goal for this is to, make sure that it's as stress-free of an experience as possible so you can perform well. And, you know, doing all of those things is gonna help a lot. So as for the interview itself, have good body language, right? You want to project confidence and competence. So, you know, stand upright, sit straight, make eye contact, you know, firmly shake these people's hands. That may be a little bit different now that the world has ended because of, you know, COVID, but, you know, kind of play that one by ear. You know, project this aura of like, I deserve to be here, I want to be here, as much as you can. So it's very important that you prepare for all of your interviews. Like, unless you just like truly do not care, like, you know, you need to show up, you need to be prepared with questions to ask your interviewer. You need to be prepared for things that you know they're going to ask you. You're almost guaranteed to be asked, like, tell me about yourself. Why do you want to come here? Why do you want to do this specialty if you're doing residency? Or what specialty do you think you're going to do if you're going into med school? What are your hobbies? Blah, blah, blah. Like, basic interview questions. Those are all gimmies, right? You know you're going to get asked those, so have good answers prepared for them. And, you know, clearly you don't want to, like, recite some memorized speech or something as a response to that, but you do want to, like, have something ready to go when they ask you what your biggest flaw is. You know, it's a stupid question, but everybody asks it, so be ready for that. Unfortunately, a lot of places have started kind of throwing curveballs to eliminate, like, interview preparedness, it seems like. So they're kind of just asking you, like, ethical questions or, you know, like, canned, you know, lists of questions instead of, like, having a conversation with you, which makes it very difficult. I actually had several personal experiences during the residency interview trail where I would be, like, talking with someone and having this, like, good conversation, and then they were like, oh wait, I'm getting off script, and then they'd, like, just abruptly go back to the questions that they're asking, and that's hard to adapt to, in my opinion. And I'm actually generally a pretty good interviewer or interviewee. That's pretty much the only thing that got me into med school, I think. I mean, that's weird anytime, right? So if you're having a conversation with somebody and they just, like, massively change the subject all of a sudden when you're, like, vibing with them, that's, like, jarring. And unfortunately, I think that's kind of, like, where some of these schools have headed. Like, one of my experiences in particular was at my home institution for residency, and I, like, hung out with two of the anesthesiologists. And they were two of my three interviewers. And so I, like, knew them personally. I was out with them all the time. And, you know, they're just, like, sitting there asking me these, like, you know, preordained questions, and I'm like, what the hell is going on? So that sort of thing is very difficult to prepare for. But, you know, generally for the, like, ethics things, there's not a wrong answer, and they're basically just asking you those questions to see how you think on your feet and handle a situation that you're uncomfortable with and unfamiliar with. And you'll find that that's a theme throughout interviews in any setting. So that was even something that we had to do in my anesthesia oral boards. We had a patient, like, part of my scenario was something about a pediatric patient, basically, that had, like, nightmares after having anesthesia, and their parents were going to sue the hospital. And the question was, like, what do you do about this? Do you involve risk management? Do you involve the ethics committee? And, like, all of that sort of stuff. And in my opinion, you're seldom going to go wrong deferring to a more practiced authority in that sort of thing. Like, if you were to say, hey, I'm going to just, like, defer to the ethics committee, they'll probably press you for an answer, but that's showing that you, like, know what your options are, basically. One of the things that I mentioned was be prepared with questions to ask your interviewer. So there will always be, usually be a session or a section of your interview where you can ask whatever you want, you know, and that it's very important that you sound like you're making an informed decision to choose that program. Figure out something that, you know, school or hospital or whatever prides themselves on, or, like, has going on currently, and talk about it. You know, whether or not you care about it is a different story, but, you know, just be able to talk about that. Like, if you're going to, say, Chicago, somewhere in Chicago, and you know that they have this, like, big urban, you know, underserved urban outreach program that the hospital allows like volunteers for and med students are involved in. Talk about that. Like, ask them about what the opportunities for that are. Like, even if you have zero intention of doing that, ask about it, because they may change your mind. That might be something that you decide you do like. So part of it is being a good interviewee, and part of it is actually like getting information for yourself. Because, if you do make an informed decision on your school, that's good all around, right? So it's going to be much easier to convince your interviewer that you are in fact interested, if you really are, and it lets you know whether or not, you actually want to go there. So if these things don't come natural to you, and especially if you're in one of those like weird artificial interviews that I mentioned, like it's really tough to like flow through that. But your interviewers know that. So they're not necessarily going to hold that against you, but if you can master the situation, then it just makes you look that much better. So again, if you're not a natural interviewer, and the prospect of talking to people who are like gonna be your boss and like own you for the next 4 years, just like makes you want to pee yourself, then practice. Like, really the only thing that you can do is practice. And fortunately, you have a lot of people who are qualified to practice with, believe it or not. So like friends, family, other people who are like at your college. Like if you're at a school with a med, or with a with like a med school, you're in a pre-med track with a med school, that's perfect. You can get involved with them and they will have tons of resources for you. But any school at all should have some sort of like advisory, committee or program that allows you to do mock interviews. And that's really, really helpful for a lot of people. So in terms of how you respond to questions, again, you're trying to put your best foot forward, right? You're trying to make yourself look awesome, and you're up against some pretty stiff competition, Like, we're all like weird science nerds for the most part, but, most of us were very successful in school and have good scores, and, generally can at least seize on, like, one interesting thing to talk about and, like, see you through a half-hour interview or however long it is. It's always a delicate balance, right? Like, you want to come off as this, like, confident person who knows what they're talking about, but you also want to be like concise and answer the questions directly. So you don't want to sit there and ramble about, your experience in Ecuador serving, poor families or whatever. Like, yeah, that's a cool experience, but unless they ask you to elaborate, like, you want this to be a conversation. You don't want to be like talking at your interviewers if you can avoid it at all. So, you give them like some tidbits that are interesting, like, yeah, I went to Ecuador and it was with this, church mission trip. We, treated a lot of kids with, I don't know, diphtheria or something. Like, we went and vaccinated kids. And, they may say, oh, well, that's really interesting. Or they may just move on. If they don't care, whatever. Don't belabor the point. So, and again, like I said, during all of this, you want to, like, have good, body position, good body language, make eye contact, show that you're engaged with this interview. Another thing that is very important that I feel like a lot of people forget is your diction matters. So that kind of goes hand in hand with being clear and concise when answering questions and making your points. So I will use myself as an example here. So since I have been creating like online content, especially on YouTube, I've been basically critiquing myself and figuring out ways to make my content more engaging, more interesting to people. One thing that I noticed about myself is that I know that I'm a very like thoughtful person, and my pace of conversation is generally very slow. And so when people ask me questions, I kind of pause a lot while I'm thinking of while I'm thinking of a good way to answer the question without being A, unclear, or B, too wordy. Because, like, frankly, I grew up in a family where communication was and still is, like, a barrier for me. I've always had to kind of work on that. So now, as a physician, it's really important that I communicate my points clearly to my patients, and I don't want my, patient interviews to be 20 minutes long when they can be 5. Since I've been listening to recordings of myself on YouTube, I realized those pauses are kind of jarring and, like, pretty frequent. So I've been trying to like eliminate the like uhs and long pauses of when I'm actually saying things that matter. So I think it would be worth your time to just record yourself talking about something that you're interested in. You know, it doesn't matter what. And, you know, record yourself like you're talking about, you know, trying to teach somebody that thing. And listen to it and see what's going on. Like, if you feel like you're not making your points well, or you're stuttering, or you're just like kind of getting lost in thought, you probably are. And that's sort of tough to hold against you in real time. You know, like if you do that during an interview, nobody's gonna like massively fault you for being difficult to listen to or anything. But if you can avoid doing that, then you're really gonna sound better. You're gonna sound like you know what you're talking about, and you know, you'll sound confident. You'll sound like you care, and like you can speak authoritatively on something. When I was an interviewer at Arkansas, which was my med school, we were not given the candidates' grades and scores. I think we had the candidates' personal statements, and also like a list of their hobbies and like subjective stuff that they submitted. It's been so long since I've submitted my med school applications, I can't even remember what they ask you for, and it might even be different now. So occasionally, like, scores and grades would come up, like if somebody just kind of mentioned it. But from what I understand, that's actually a pretty common practice, to have your interviewers blinded of your scores. And what that says pretty loud and clear is that you're more or less on a level playing field when you show up to an interview. So they have deemed you worthy to go into their program. But now they want to make sure that you're not like a freaking robot, that you're actually a person who will show up and, you know, be a good classmate, be a good team member, potentially be somebody who will, you know, work at the hospital and be a good team member there, and like go into that same community. Because, you know, statistically speaking, especially for like state schools, you are much more likely to be in the area of that school and or that residency program once you graduate. So they want colleagues who are cool, who are good teammates. And I can tell you now, interviewing for like jobs with my partnership, that's really all that matters. Your personality is like it. Like if you've got your MD or DO, like we don't really care like what your transcript looked like nobody gives a shit. It's just whether or not you're gonna like have our backs when you know, the going gets rough. Like if you're gonna charge into some room, you know, to help us with a code, or you're gonna like pick up some slack without anybody asking you to, like do a bunch of like random tasks that, you know, are sitting around. That's all that matters. Like you were just assumed to be competent for the job by virtue of having finished a residency program. And I know that that's clearly not the case for med school, and to a lesser extent for residency, because like scores and grades still matter there. But like professionally, when you're not in an academic setting where they're going to look at your like research accomplishments and stuff, like all you have to do is be a good teammate. And that is by far the most important thing that we look for. You know, like I said, they've already basically told you that you are acceptance material by interviewing you. Right? They're not going to waste their time on you if they think that you have zero chance of getting in, because what sense does that make? Like, they have schools and residency programs have limited resources as well, and they can't just interview somebody with the hopes that like there will be a stellar interview candidate and like, you know, raise their app up to the bar. So let's see, what did I ask during my interview? I pretty much did exactly what I just told you. I wanted to know like what people's interests were, how they used their free time. Yeah, sorry for missing these questions, by the way, guys. How they use their free time. You know, I would often ask why they wanted to go to Arkansas, so I was an out-of-state student at Arkansas, because I'm born and raised in Missouri. I'm in the Kansas City area now, like I mentioned. And they, I guess, thought that for whatever reason I would vibe better with the out-of-state students. So most of the people I interviewed were out-of-state candidates. So I would ask them, you know, like where they were from, why they wanted to come to Arkansas, which generally the real answer is because nowhere else will accept me, but that's, you have to figure out something better than that to say. The assumption was that their scores and grades were good. And like I said, I had their rec letters too, so if you know, if they had like something that sort of stood out in their rec letter or in their personal statement, I would ask them about that, like some interesting experience. Eye contact. Do they mind gazes outwards, or do you need to be constantly fixated on the interviewer? Well, I mean, you don't want to stare them down. I mean, that's weird. But, you know, while they are like engaging you, certainly while they're talking to you, you definitely need to be making eye contact. And, you know, while you're responding, it's just sort of natural to kind of look away while you're thinking or trying to gather yourself or look for an answer. And I mean, that's fine. You know, you don't have to put too much thought into it. Like, just be aware of your eye contact and that, like, what that says about what you're saying. Because if you can talk to someone directly and, you know, you're like speaking to them instead of just like saying words. Let's see, can I give an example of what bad interviewees have done that was a red flag for me? So like I kind of led with, dude, if you haven't like showered and you're like obviously kind of dirty, that's a clear sign to your interviewers that you just don't care. You know, if you just like didn't bother to, you know, take that occasion seriously, like that's a huge problem. And as far as like actual performance during the interview, like basically just not being able to answer easy like softball questions, you know, like the ones that I threw to you, like why do you want to go here, tell me about yourself, what's your biggest flaw, what's your biggest strength, like all of those kinds of things. Like, you know, if you just sit there and like stare blankly, you know, it's okay if you don't have the best answer in the world, but if you just like act like you got hit by a truck when somebody asks you that question, it's like, dude, like you're going into like one of the highest stress professions there is, and you can't answer this like easy question. Come on, man. Does my interview style change when talking with non-traditional versus traditional? Not me personally, honestly. The topics change clearly because generally like a non-traditional student will have more you know, just more life experience, basically. They'll have work experience and, you know, sometimes they're very successful. Like, for instance, one of the guys that I graduated residency with was a physical therapist and a drug rep before he went to med school. And, you know, like, perfectly financially successful. He just chose to do something different. It's a little bit easier to see that those people want to do it, you know, they want to make that journey, that for some reason. You know, like they've given up a lucrative career to practice medicine, so like I guess you could say they sort of have a little bit of like street cred in terms of desire to be there, and like legitimacy to their application, instead of like let's be real here, there are a fair amount of people who are pushed by their families to go into medicine, and you know that just is like totally eliminated. You know, if you have somebody who's 35 and has had a previous career and they're making a career change, like, you know, obviously that was a very premeditated and like hardcore decision to make, because they're like giving up this, you know, incurring a huge opportunity cost to go there and you know, presumably have done a whole lot of extra work to get to the point where they are qualified to apply to med school, you know, over the top of what they had previously done. So no is the short answer, but the questions that you ask and generally the course of the interview are definitely different, just because of experience level of the applicant. If you are an older applicant, does that reduce your chance to get in? So as I mentioned, not in my opinion. Like, you have a different perspective on what you're doing, and you have like made this very deliberate choice to be applying to med school. I think that actually helps you. What were the demographics like in my residency? Lots of white. I was in Kansas, so white people, lots and lots of white people. I think that's actually changed. Like, currently the demographics are very different, but mostly, yeah, it's like white people from the Midwest. Do I think a man bun is bad for residency interviews? I mean, it wouldn't be my first choice. It wouldn't be my first choice, but I mean, dude, you do you know, if you can like make it look professional, you know, take care of it, then fire away. As a corollary to my last answer, you have to remember that medicine has traditionally been and still is dominated by conservative white dudes. So try to sort of view what's acceptable for interviews through that prism, right? I would imagine that Dr. DeBakey probably is not a huge, or was not a huge fan of man buns. So careful. Who do I recommend practicing interviewing with? So ideally would be like your school, basically. Like, your school should have advisors who are set up for that. like and they're used to doing mock interviews and will ask you those the tough questions that you might see and the softballs, so you can practice answers to those softballs. That's great, but friends, family, they're fine. Write out a list of questions that you think that you will be asked, and just have them ask you in like some random order, so you don't know what's coming next necessarily, and there's at least like some semblance of having an actual interview there. Just do it over and over, and like you'll hear yourself respond to these questions and like think, oh, that was a dumb answer, or hey, that was a good answer, and you can like perfect what you say over time. Do you send a thank you email after the interview? Yes, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. I meant to mention that. Do something personal and say, hey, like I enjoyed talking about X with you. Like for me in particular, I interviewed at Arkansas, which is my only med school interview, by the way. I interviewed there the day before Missouri played Arkansas in the Cotton Bowl. We talked a lot about football, basically, during my interview, and they were giving me a lot of crap. So I said something about the game. I can't remember what it was, but like Missouri just steamrolled Arkansas. I think it was like 38-7 or something. It was a freaking blowout. And I said something about that. Sort of ballsy maybe, but at least they like it's something to remember you by. It doesn't have to be long, because again, like they're probably just gonna throw it away. Like chances are they'll just take it out of their mailbox and toss it in the trash. But still, it's worth it. It's worth your effort. That takes 10 minutes of your time. No reason to not do that. So, one question that I left out is you need to be able to answer, what are you going to do if you don't get in? The reason I was reminded of that is applications to DO schools. Is a very, very good answer to that. Basically, you're, say like, well, I'm sure I want to be a doctor, and I've applied to all of these schools to like make sure that I get in. And then, you set yourself up for the YMD instead of DO. And that is a trickier question to answer. But, you can be real in these interviews, honestly. Like, you can say, I would rather be an MD because I understand that historically there's been some discrimination against DOs. I think that is a perfectly legitimate answer. Like, like my employability is better if I'm an MD. There is nothing wrong with saying that. I mean, that's a very realistic, educated answer to a question like that they probably won't expect, quite frankly. Like if somebody said that to me in an interview, I'd be like, oh crap, this guy knows what's up. Like if you're actually thinking about like your job opportunities in the future, like most people in y'all's position, like in pre-meds, are like, nobody has any idea what the hell's going on with medicine, and you shouldn't. Like that's not a dig. It's like you're pre-med. Like why would you understand like the details of getting hired in practice? That just, that's not necessary. I talked with the admissions people. Oh yeah, here's another thing you should do. Talk with the admissions staff. 100% contact the admissions staff and say, hey, I'm really excited to come to your program. Yada, yada, yada. Is there anything else I need to do? What's a good place to stay? Is this place close to the school? Like, whatever. Just some random crap that you can, like, think of to, thank them and show them that you're just, like, more than a number. Did most of the students in my class change their mind about what specialty they wanted to go into? Yes, absolutely. So since we're sort of tying this into interviews, that's something that you should be very open about. If you have a specialty in mind, I highly recommend, qualifying it with like, well, like I want to go into radiology, but I've also seen these other things and these look cool too. And I'm, I understand that most people, change their minds, and I'm totally open to that. This is sort of hard to do, but if you can figure out like what the school you're talking to like specializes in, like if they have a residency program that's like particularly good in something, like maybe talk about that. Dead giveaways are like if they're making a new like heart hospital or something, like, oh, I see you have this cardiology thing or cardiothoracic surgery program, like that must be really cool, and that'll get them talking. Just a good strategy. Like, observe your environment, right? Do your research. Have I ever interviewed anyone who had retail sales experience in undergrad? How was it a different experience than someone who had not worked at all? Okay, so a more general take on this is I feel like a lot of the experiences, like as an interviewer, and judging from my own personal experiences, I feel like a lot of the things that are understood to be sort of de facto requirements for med school, like volunteering and like working in labs and stuff like that, have very, very, very little to do with informing your decision to go to med school. And I treated interviewees as such. Because I did all of that. I also worked a retail job. I was a pharmacy tech for 3 years in like the hood, like the kind of place where I got called a cracker like every 2 weeks. If I had to choose one thing, that was easily the most useful experience that I had, because it taught me how to deal with people, one, taught me how to diffuse tense situations with people. It taught me how to take people's shit and not like, get revved up about it. It also taught me about what people are concerned with and like why, what goes through their mind and like how to sort of head that off at the pass. And furthermore, it also taught me a lot about pharmacology. I actually knew most of the pharmacology I learned in med school, like the vast majority of it, probably 3/4 plus before I even got in there. So yeah, the short version of that story is I feel like employment experience is very useful, and especially like front of the house kind of stuff. Like if you're a server or you're doing retail, where you're like in the line of fire constantly, like dealing with people, that is extremely useful. Clearly like the things that interviewers value will be colored by their own personal experiences, and that is definitely the case for me. So people who had been pharmacy techs or had been, like orderlies or something, or like nurse assistants or whatever, people who had like done those like thankless like frontline jobs and still wanted to do this, I was like, okay, well, you probably have a much better idea of what you're getting into than so a volunteer gig that I had was I was in an ER putting charts together. Like I just sat in this back room and stacked papers for like 2 hours and then went home. Like how useful do you think that really was when it came to choosing whether or not I wanted to be a doctor? Like that was totally worthless. But it still showed up on my application as emergency room volunteering. Like when you have a job, you're relied on to do that job to some degree, right? So you have some sort of expectation. If you're a volunteer, like anything that you do is bonus. It's free labor. So nobody cares, basically. Nobody gives a crap what you do. But if you're employed, like you have responsibilities. So I think that is much more valuable. Currently serving and plan to continue after med school. Would you recommend wearing a military uniform to interview? So first off, thank you for your service. It's a really shitty time to be in the military, and I appreciate you being involved in that. That's really cool. Formal wear is fine. In my opinion, anything formal is fine. If you're a dude, wear a suit. Like women's wear is a little bit more, subjective, but never gonna go wrong wearing a suit, if you're either gender. But yeah, military is fine. That's formal wear. There's nothing weird about that at all. In fact, I think that'd probably be a leg up for you, because a lot of people understand that, that's a huge commitment, and you have some really important life experience, basically. And that'll be a big topic of conversation for your interview. So yeah, that's as long as that's cool with the military. I don't know what the protocol is for civilian use of military garb, but yeah, as long as the government's not gonna get pissed off about that, then yeah, awesome. So what things should you bring up during interviews to see if it'll be a good fit culture-wise? So that's a sensitive topic, right? That was the first thing that came to mind. It's like you can't say like, hey, are the students here jackasses? But you can ask it nicely, like, what sort of like social events do the students have? What opportunities do they have to like get to know people? Like, I'm gonna be new here. Are there like clubs, or there groups, that I can get involved with? Yeah, I think like asking about like student associations and things like that is probably the best you're gonna do. Or like, ask if there's some sort of like area where the students live. Maybe there's some sort of like apartment complex nearby where everybody sticks together. Let's see, attended a webinar earlier that mentioned jobs like working at a trampoline park appear to make an applicant a bit more interesting. That seems like an interesting job to me. Would I find certain job placements interesting or making applicants stand out during interviews? Or does it matter where you work? No, it absolutely matters where you work. So here's the thing about any experience, okay? You have to be able to discuss it, like, eloquently, right? You have to, like, if they ask you about it, like, say something intelligent. You know, if they say, well, what's it like working in a trampoline park? And you say, oh, it's all right, I guess. Like, you lose. That's a bad answer. You know, say something like, it's crazy. Like, people are just bouncing around all over the place, and, you know, we have all of these, like, huge drops that you can strap yourself into a bungee cord and, like, fall 50 feet, and it's cool, and you fly all over the place. Like, you know, it's all about how you frame it and how you discuss it. But yeah, long story short, like I said, just have something intelligent to say about your experiences. And that falls into the category of, you know, these are get me questions you know you're going to be asked. So come up with something useful to say about them. Let's see. I've noticed pre-meds have really awkward fashion sense. 100% true. What kind of tips can you give that will benefit throughout a medical career other than always dressing well for formal events other than told not to? You're never really going to go wrong. Like, for guys, you're never going to go wrong with a black suit. Like, you know, a nicely tailored black suit. It's a little, like, you know, funeral-ish, I guess. Sometimes, especially for like job interviews and stuff, but classic colors like charcoal gray and navy, anything like that, make sure it's, you know, cleaned, pressed, appropriately tailored. As I mentioned earlier, like, medicine is an overwhelmingly conservative profession, so, you know, dress accordingly. Let me back up a second. I am the worst person on the planet to ask about fashion. If you watch my previous streams, like, I am freaking dressed up tonight, man. I usually am here rocking out a white undershirt that you can basically see through and gym shorts. But again, basically just dress conservative, dress power suits, you know, like navy suit, white shirt, red tie. Like, nothing wrong with that, man. It's always gonna do you right. Okay, back to the actual topic of what we're doing here. Let's see here. If I just get stumped or knocked on your butt during the interview, do you guess and BS or just say you don't know? I would say I don't know. You know, don't, like, unless you know enough to bullshit convincingly, then don't do that. Because, like, you know, keep in mind that these are pretty intelligent people. Maybe not the most emotionally intelligent people or socially intelligent, but, you know, if you feed them a line of crap, they're gonna know it. But yeah, the idea is to prepare for the obvious stuff. So if they ask you some, like, weird curveball question, you know, a lot of times interviewers will ask you questions that you are not supposed to know the answer to. And, like, they want to see how you're thinking on your feet. So for those questions, I would not say I don't know. I would take the time to think of something useful to say. And, you know, like, it seems like a freaking eternity if you're sitting there just, like, trying to get your brain to, like, churn out something meaningful, but it's worth it. Can I give an example of a question they expect you to not know? So the example from my personal experience was during my anesthesia oral boards, where there was a family, like, in this, like, you know, fictional situation, there was a family who was going to sue because their kid had nightmares after surgery. And, like, what do you do? So, I mean, there's no, like, I don't know. I still don't know. Like, call my lawyer and figure out what the hell's happening. That's the real answer. And that's what I told him. I was like, yeah, I would absolutely, you know, they were like, would you notify risk management? I'm like, hell yeah, I'd notify risk management. What the fuck? Like, you know, if they're threatening lawsuits, like, I'm out, man. Like, that's the lawyer problem. And so they just put you in these, like, weird ethical or, like, you know, unrealistic situations that you have to talk through. Basically, that's what they want you to do. Coming out of lockdown, quarantine, social skills may be lacking for pre-meds and med students. Yeah, or for everybody. Pre-meds and med students are kind of on the short end of that stick anyway. So yeah, that's gonna be a problem. What do I think about that? And what is the best way to work on it? And be transparent with interviewers. I mean, I think the best thing to do about it is be transparent with interviewers. You know, like, again, if you can explain and, like, discuss your experience, like, thoughtfully, then you're good. Like, that's really what they're after, more than, like, you arriving at, like, the right answer. You know, they want you to, like, say something intelligent. You know, you can just talk about, like, it's been hard, right? It's been hard for everybody. Like, my personal, like, my life changed very little, except for the, like, 2 months where Kansas City was on, like, total lockdown and, like, businesses were shut down and stuff. Like, that was fucking terrible, don't get me wrong. But like what is weird for me is gauging other people's comfort. You know, some people like that I know are still like, you know, they will wear a mask whenever they're inside somebody's house. You know, and I'm not saying that's weird, but there's like, you know, there's a big spectrum of things that people are comfortable with in terms of like personal interaction these days. You know, historically, like in the US, like the way you introduce yourself is a big hearty handshake, look somebody in the eye and say, hey, I'm, you know, John Smith, and nice to meet you. And, you know, is that okay? I don't know. In some places, maybe. Some places, maybe not. So, you know, the like anxiety and like uncertainty surrounding those issues is definitely like a very good thing to talk about. Tips and tricks for online interviews. Much the same, but like clearly the whole like eye contact thing is a little bit more difficult. Like what I'm doing right now is like looking at a camera, not a person, and it's harder to like, you know, like the person is gonna be like here on the screen, right, instead of, you know, wherever your camera is, so it's gonna look weird no matter what. Like if you're actually looking at their eyes, it's gonna look like you're not, kind of thing. So, you know, the like getting that sort of like solid personal contact is obviously pretty difficult online, but yeah, I mean, like the general advice still applies. You know, just try to sound like you know what you're talking about as much as possible, basically, and you know, be friendly, be gregarious and outgoing, and you know, just generally try to like make a friend. You know, like really, it's a professional interaction clearly, but like, you know, you're trying to be likable. Like they're trying to grill you, you are trying to be likable and intelligent. Like whether it seems like they're grilling you or not, they are probing you 100%. They're trying to figure you out, because that's the whole point. All right, folks. Well, y'all have a good night. Thank you for coming out and the support. I do appreciate it again. Have a good one. Hopefully you enjoyed that. I am MilkmanAl. Take it easy, guys. Oh, and the VOD for this will be up on my YouTube, and also here on Twitch, by the way. So if you want to watch that, please do. Take it easy, folks. Have a wonderful night. I enjoyed myself, and again, hope you did too. Peace.